She was just a market woman with dust on her feet, and dreams she dared not speak aloud. The heat pressed heavy on her shoulders as she lifted the last of her faded baskets, her hands trembling, not from age, but from a weariness that had long taken root in her bones. At the far edge of the market, an old woman crouched by the roadside, her face lost beneath a tattered scarf, her frail hands quivering around a small calabash she struggled to lift. People passed without pause. Some turned their faces, others hardened their hearts. But not Adana. She had little, barely enough to claim as her own. Yet somehow, her steps moved toward the woman, guided not by logic, but by a silent ache she carried deep inside. Adana crouched low, her knees cracking softly as she reached for the old woman's calabash. The gourd was heavier than it looked, a full burden, much like the invisible ones Adana carried every day. "Let me help, Mama," she said, her voice low, carrying the quiet respect of someone who had tasted hardship too often to ignore it in others. The old woman did not look up. She only gave a slow, trembling nod. Adana didn't ask why the woman sat there in the dust, nor did she question where her family was, or whether she had eaten. She simply tied the gourd to the top of her own basket with a frayed strip of cloth and shifted the doubled weight onto her back. As she straightened, a bead of sweat slid from her temple, catching the slanting afternoon light. Her hands were cracked and calloused. Her wrapper, once vibrant, was faded and worn thin at the edges. And yet, there was a quiet grace in the way she moved, tired, yes, but unbroken. She didn't speak of the nights spent curled up hungry, her stomach hollow as a drum. She didn't mention the sandals, so worn the earth had learned the shape of her soles. Instead, she smiled, a small, weary smile that revealed no complaint, and with slow, steady steps she began to walk, carrying not just her own burden, but the weight of a stranger's too. Behind that smile lived a life whittled down by hardship. But Adana's mother had once whispered a truth into her ear. Kindness is the only wealth the world cannot take from you. And so, she gave what she had, even when her hands were empty. The market folded in on itself, stalls shuttered, goods packed away. The sun sagged low on the horizon, dragging shadows long and thin across the dirt roads. Adana moved carefully, the calabash balanced against her back, her own goods swaying with every step. Eyes followed her, curious, pitying, dismissive, but no one spoke. A few shook their heads. Wasted effort, their expressions said without words. Halfway across the road, the sky split, not with lightning, but with the heavy scent of impending rain. Vendors scrambled for shelter. Mats were rolled hastily, baskets dragged under frayed awnings. The market dissolved into a panicked shuffle, but Adana did not run. She merely shifted the calabash higher against her spine, the rough surface burning against her palms, and pressed forward. The first fat drops hit, darkening the dust, dappling her wrapper like bruises. Mud sucked at her bare feet with each step. Still, she kept moving, steady, unhurried, until she reached the old woman, who sat unmoving, untouched by the chaos around her. Whether she didn't notice or simply didn't care, Adana couldn't tell. Without a word, Adana crouched again, knees sinking into the softening earth. She pulled a tattered cloth from her basket, meant for shielding her goods, and draped it gently over the woman's hunched shoulders. The old woman's hands, wrinkled, bird-like, moved slowly, almost cautiously, to clutch the cloth tighter around her body. A sound slipped from her lips, a whisper, thin as smoke, carried away by the wind. Adana didn't ask what she said. She only smiled, that same weary, unbroken smile, and turned away. Her bare feet slipped slightly in the mud as she rose, but she caught herself and kept walking, the rain now falling harder, washing the dust from the road, washing away footprints and shame alike. Across the road, leaning against the chipped wall of an old shop, a man stood watching. He didn't belong here. His shoes were polished, his shirt crisp, untouched by the market's dust and noise. He blended in only because he was still, silent, unmoving, his gaze fixed entirely on Adana. In his hand, a black umbrella hung useless, forgotten. He made no move to open it. His name was Oluchi, CEO of a corporation whose name sparked on Lagos and stirred whispers of envy far beyond it. A billionaire. A man used to being seen, being sought after. And yet here, no one noticed him. No handshakes, no nods of recognition. Only the heavy, wet air and the pounding of rain against the earth. Only himself. Kelechi's eyes followed the small, unremarkable act of mercy, a cloth draped over bent shoulders, with a strange, unfamiliar tightness in his chest. His driver had long retreated to the safety of the car. His assistant had given up and was nowhere to be seen. Still, Kelechi stood, rain flattening his hair, plastering his shirt to his skin. He watched Adana, watched the way she slipped slightly in the mud, righted herself without complaint, and walked on, burdened yet steady. The gourd she carried might as well have been invisible. It was the weight she bore in silence that Kelechi saw. Something in him, a part buried under years of profit margins and polished glass offices, stirred. He didn't understand it yet. He only knew one thing. He would find her again. The next morning, the market smelled of wet earth, and something else, the faint, trembling scent of new beginnings. Adana returned, as she always did. Basket empty at dawn. Hopes emptier still. She settled under her usual spot, a leaning mango tree whose roots pushed stubbornly through cracked earth, and began her day. Slowly, methodically, she arranged the few roasted groundnuts left from the day before, their scent sharp and familiar. But her mind wandered. The old woman's face, or what little she had seen of it, tugged at her thoughts like a persistent thread. Who was she? Why had she stayed there, unmoving, as the sky fell? Adana shook herself gently, focusing back on her work. She had more pressing worries, rent long overdue, a cracked cooking pot barely holding itself together, her younger brother's school fees, slipping further out of reach. Still, as she haggled over a bag of peanuts or brushed the red dust from her faded skirt, her eyes betrayed her, straying again and again down the narrow road. Waiting. For what? She could not say. Then, just as the morning's heat began to settle, a boy appeared, no more than 8, barefoot, grinning wide. He said nothing as he pressed a crumpled envelope into her palm. A quick nod, and he was gone, swallowed by the market's endless motion. Adana smoothed the damp paper between her fingers. No letter inside, only a single address, neatly printed in a hand she did not recognize. She stared at it, the thin paper trembling slightly in her hands, as if it too understood the weight of what it carried. Adana stared at the paper long after the boy had disappeared, the noise of the market fading into a dull hum around her. The envelope carried a faint scent, subtle, expensive, the kind of perfume that clung to air-conditioned rooms she had only glimpsed from outside, never entered. The address written there pointed to a place she knew only by reputation, Lekki. Rich man's land. Her heart jittered against her ribs, uneven and uncertain. A mistake, surely. No one she knew, no one from her world, had reason to go there. Not even the market women who whispered stories of sudden fortune and sharper ruin. She turned the paper over, almost hoping for more. But there was only that same neat, deliberate handwriting, silent, mysterious. Her fingers trembled slightly, the edges of the paper too crisp, too real. It could be a trick. It could be a trap. Or it could be something else, something she didn't dare name. Hope, fragile and foolish, flickered inside her chest, bright and rebellious against the gray weight of experience. Slowly, carefully, Adana folded the paper and tucked it deep into the folds of her wrapper, guarding it as if it might vanish with the morning breeze. For the first time in many long months, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, not filled with empty plates and cracked pots, but something gentler, something almost like a dream. And for the first time, she dared to believe it might be hers. Weeks passed. Adana settled into her new life, though each morning still felt like waking inside someone else's dream. A life too clean, too polished, almost too quiet. She wore new clothes now, simple, elegant uniforms that fit her body and her pride in ways her old wrapper never could. She ate full meals, 3 times a day, without rationing bites or hiding hunger behind a tight smile. Her stomach, once hollow as a drum, no longer cried out in the silence of night. But peace rarely comes without a price. There was another woman, Ngozi, who had worked there longer than anyone could remember. She smiled often, but the smiles never quite reached her eyes. They were too bright, too fixed, too careful. When Adana passed, Ngozi's smiles tightened further, thin, brittle things that cracked at the edges. Long ago, Ngozi had once dreamed of rising beyond these walls herself. But years of being overlooked, of watching others come and go while she remained invisible, had soured hope into something bitter and sharp. And slowly, small things began to unravel. A set of keys misplaced. A tray tipped just so. Complaints whispered. Meals gone wrong. Tasks left undone. Things Adana knew she hadn't touched. At first, she thought it coincidence. A house this large carried its own ghosts, its own mischief. But the seeds had been planted, quiet and invisible, and it wasn't long before they took root. Kelechi's mother, old, sharp-eyed, still powerful, grew colder in her glances. Where once there had been cautious warmth, there was now only a tightening around the mouth, a cool distance in her gaze. Adana began to feel it, the weight of unseen eyes, the prickle of distrust crawling over her skin, like an unwelcome fog. It grew, slow and sure, like mold blooming in forgotten corners. She said nothing. She merely folded her hands tighter, smiled smaller, and waited, because in her bones, Adana knew, storms often begin in silence. One evening, as the sun bled into the sea, Adana was summoned. The house felt different, quieter, heavier, as she walked the long hall toward the sitting room. The air itself seemed to tighten around her, thick and unmoving. Kelechi stood by the large glass doors, his silhouette framed by the dying light. His face was unreadable, carved from stone. Across the room, his mother sat rigid in her chair, her gnarled hands folded neatly in her lap. Before her, a file lay open. Inside, the evidence, photographs, sharp, damning, of jewelry tucked into Adana's locker, receipts she had never signed, items she had never seen, lies, wrapped carefully in the shape of truth. Ngozi stood just off to the side, silent, but victorious. Her smile was gone now, replaced with something colder. Satisfaction curdled into triumph. Adana's throat tightened. The word she needed tangled and useless. "You disappoint me," Kelechi's mother said at last, her voice brittle as dry leaves crushed underfoot. Adana opened her mouth, but no words came. Only silence. "She should leave," Ngozi said softly, her voice smooth, almost gentle, a blade wrapped in silk. Kelechi said nothing. His silence was louder than any accusation, heavier than any blow. The room waited, holding its breath. Adana bowed her head. The weight of injustice, thick, leaden, cruel, pressed her down, down until she thought she might disappear under it. But she didn't plead. She didn't protest. She simply turned, gathering what little remained of her dignity, and walked. No suitcase, no farewell, only herself, and the quiet, heavy knowledge that sometimes, even kindness is not enough to protect you. She left the way she had come, empty-handed, but unbroken. Days passed. Adana returned to the market, not because she wanted to, but because survival demanded it. The baskets she carried felt heavier now, though their weight hadn't changed. It was her back, bent lower, her steps slower, under the invisible load of betrayal and silence. One afternoon, as the sun hung low and heavy, a sleek car pulled up beside her. The door opened, and Kelechi stepped out alone. No suit this time, no polished distance, just a man in a simple shirt and trousers, sleeves rolled, collar loose. He crossed the narrow street without hesitation, the market noise fading around him. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low, almost lost in the hum of the afternoon. In his hand, he held a small object, the bracelet Adana had given to the old woman that rainy day. The threads were worn now, the beads dulled, but it carried something greater than gold. "We found the truth," Kelechi said. "Ngozi, she has been dismissed." Adana said nothing. She only stared, the weight of the weeks pressing harder against her ribs. "My mother," Kelechi continued, voice rough with something that might have been regret. "She was wrong. I was wrong." He smiled then, a sad, small thing, but real. A smile with no edges, no armor. "If you'll trust us again," he paused, searching her face. "The offer still stands." Adana's eyes dropped to the bracelet, the worn threads, the cheap beads. She reached out, but stopped halfway. Her fingers hovered. Trust was a currency she no longer spent easily. Memories tugged at her, the silent accusations, the cold stares, the way her dignity had been stripped without warning. Her heart tightened, a small, silent protest against more hurt. But then, she looked at the bracelet again. A small thing, given without expectation, kept without price. True kindness was rare, and rare things must be held carefully. She breathed in slowly, feeling the dust, the weight, the memory of rain. Then, after a moment's stillness, she took the bracelet and nodded, and the world, heavy and sharp for so long, softened just a little around her. Adana returned, but this time not as a maid. At the long dining table, where she once stood silently in the background, Kelechi's mother now insisted she sit beside her, an equal, not a servant. Respect, once withheld, was now given without condition. Adana moved carefully through this new life, carrying her humility with her like a well-worn cloak. She never forgot the feel of dust between her toes, the sharp hunger that once gnawed at her belly. But the tightness in her chest had loosened. Her smiles, once small and tired, now bloomed fully, reaching her eyes, lifting her cheeks in ways they hadn't for years. She joined the family's foundation, working to help women like herself, women with cracked hands and unbroken spirits, build businesses, grow futures, and believe in possibilities that once seemed too distant to name. She didn't chase riches. She didn't seek crowns. She moved with a steadiness born of hard ground and harder lessons. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in bruised colors, Adana sat quietly in the garden with Kelechi's mother. Between them, a shallow woven basket rested on a stool, filled with groundnuts. They shelled them slowly, their fingers moving in a rhythm older than memory. No riches, no crowns, no grand speeches. Just two women, side by side, sharing a quiet, hard-won peace. And for the first time in a long time, Adana felt it. Not the thrill of victory, not the sting of survival, but something softer. Contentment. In a world too quick to judge, it is kindness that reveals true wealth. Adana had nothing, no riches, no status. Yet she gave freely, without hesitation. And in return, she received what gold could never buy: dignity, respect, and a new life built not on fortune, but on grace. Kindness sees beyond appearances. It reminds us that fortune doesn't always wear silk or ride in polished cars. Sometimes it waits quietly in the dust, not looking for a handout, but hoping for a hand, extended in simple, human compassion. In a place where many passed by, Adana stopped. She gave what little she had, and in doing so, changed her world. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What kindness have you given today?